Welcome, everybody. So for this panel, we're talking about the future of attribution and cross-channel measurement, right? So I'm joined by these three gentlemen. I'll let them introduce themselves, and we'll get started.
I'm Cam Bush, Director of Paid Media at HexClad is true, but also Head of Advertising at HexClad because I got promoted, so.
Congrats.
Congratulations. I'm Ron Jacobson, co-founder and CEO of Rockerbox. We're a marketing measurement and attribution software provider working with brands like Warby Parker, Weight Watchers, Burden Snowboards for their cross-channel measurement. So very perfect topic for us.
And I'm John Cairo. I'm the solutions engineer at Elevar. I work with the engineering team and everybody at Buxton. And I'm kind of here to hang out with these three guys.
Awesome. And for those who don't know me, my name is Ash, CMO and co-founder of a health and wellness brand called Obvi. So today, let's kick it off, right? I would imagine everybody here is running ads on Meta, correct? How many people have started to diversify away from Meta? Just a show of hands. Okay, awesome. So I think let's kick it off, right? I think when brands typically start, they will always go for the behemoth, which is Meta, right? Reliable, scalable. I think the question, Cam, if you want to kick it off, is when do brands, or when is it the best time to start diversifying away from Meta?
I don't know if it's necessarily the best time to start diversifying away from Meta, but ideally, you test a lot of channels in your infancy because that's when the noise is going to be the least noisy. I think that's the hardest part of being kind of we spend quite a bit of money on Facebook and across a ton of different channels. And when your, momentum is already moving and you're spending quite a bit of money on things that are difficult to measure, different levels of online and offline, that noise is kind of, somebody's going to be able to sell you something that'll say it's working. But if you don't, run that in the infant stages, it's really, really hard. So I think it's less diversifying away from Meta and always considering other channels, like right from the get-go. But once, you reach your ceiling on Meta, it's pretty clear when you can't test or media buy your way out of a growth hole. Creative's a big step and a big topic, but I'd say the earlier the better.
So leading off of that is, when you do kind of test these different channels, right? How are you actually and accurately showcasing what is actually working for the brand and what's not?
We use quite a few measurement solutions, probably too many. And in doing so, you get a different lens on each different channel, and you become more aware of each of those lenses' biases and, where that channel really fits in the funnel. I think what we've moved more towards is really trusting our post-purchase survey, and genuinely including that in our optimization and being a lot more long-term. We can start looking at the trees and be a little less in the forest when, or vice versa, reverse that. We can start looking at the forest and be a little less in the trees when we're looking at our post-purchase survey data, and you're not just kind of always trying to follow the ROAS. And I think that that's a really good exercise to understand that where your customers think that they start their journey is probably the best place for you to invest in.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to jump in really quickly. Cam, you said, so we know when you diversify channels, oftentimes you have to diversify measurement strategies too. And I think that's something that people often forget, right? You jump on a new channel and you think it's going to perform the same way as Meta will perform the same way or can be measured the same way as TikTok. And that's not the case. So I guess the question is, there's a lot of different tools that you can use to help you. And I know you guys use basically all of them, but there's lots of people in this room who won't be able to use all those tools. So when we were prepping for this, you were telling me that with post-purchase surveys, you were able to come within 95% of what all these very sophisticated tools do. So can you just kind of elaborate on that?
Yeah, this is ultimate back of the napkin marketing that we created with our post-purchase survey. We compared it to our Northbeam data. We compared it to our GA4 data. We compared it to our Shopify data. And we put all of our spend onto a big whiteboard by channel, and then our one-day click, one-day view, extend that out as much as you can with our Northbeam data. And then we put it up against our where did you hear about us first in our post-purchase survey. We kind of reverse that into a CAC by channel, including like a ROAS, like a CAC to LTV or CAC to AOV. And from there, it was very clear that the top of the funnel was the winner on the post-purchase survey. When you get into the click data, it's very obvious that the bottom of the funnel is the winner. We took a gamble and said, let's believe what our customers are telling us when they're starting their journey, because the third question in that survey is, how long did you wait to buy us? And the most common answer there was 60 to 90 days. So if we know that you're waiting 60 to 90 days, you're going through 2 different cookie cycles, you're not even going to hit the one-day click, one-day view, or the 30-day view. So in doing so, we were putting a lot of eggs in the long-term basket. But the channel allocation we got out of it was almost identical to what Face or Northbeam ended up giving us in our first MMM. And when we kind of saw that side by side, we were like, oh, I wish we hadn't spent all that money on the MMM. But we also felt really validated in understanding that top of funnel and long term is really important to us. And keeping your money where your mouth is and not optimizing away from something is really hard to do. And it takes a little bit of courage to wait for the end of that month. But it works.
Ron, what's your thoughts on this, right? Actually, question for the audience. How many people are using post-purchase surveys to ask that question, where did you first hear about us? If you're not using a post-purchase survey, I definitely recommend it just based off of, what these guys are saying. But Ron, question for you is, how do you guys at, Rockerbox include that type of data to help with, direction, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, post-purchase surveys are great. I echo the sentiment. Everybody should be using them. It's easy, affordable, gives you really great insight. And it is an input that we use at Rockerbox. We try to get as many sources of data as possible. Clicks, view-through data, survey data. Some of it is model data. Some of it is, we also work a lot around offline channels, so like linear TV and connected TV. So we try to centralize as much data as we possibly can to tell the best story for what's actually driving your marketing. Surveys are a great source of that, particularly if you have like a high direct percentage. I love surveys as a way, if someone comes to your site direct or even via organic search, but they then tell you, hey, I heard about you through that ad on Roku or Facebook or TikTok. That's a simple, let's take the credit that was previously being allocated to direct or Google and put it to the right channel. So yeah, surveys are, again, no-brainer to use. Also, it's interesting, even the point you were just saying before, like if it's so directional to the MMM that you're running, it starts to lead to questions for marketers. When and where should you be using different tools? And if you are using a post-purchase survey to kind of validate the MMM, do you continue running models? And I think that's also a question of, as you start going more omni-channel, you're not going to be able to have a post-purchase survey if someone's buying your product in retail or wholesale. So it's potentially just different use cases for different types of measurement as well, because you can't always ask the customer, how did you hear about us?
And sometimes they almost forget, because it's like once you start to see one ad on one platform, then it's like, all right, I see it on TikTok, I see it on YouTube. And
the classic example is people put in their post-purchase surveys a channel that they're not even running on, and they see like what percentage of the time that gets selected. And you can, use that to kind of calibrate the post-purchase surveys, also randomizing orders of survey responses. Yeah, there's Matt from Fairing here. He's a survey wizard, so you can go talk to him and get some more info on what he would say for post-purchase surveys.
John, any additional thoughts?
I guess going back to, what Brad was talking about earlier this morning in terms of tailwinds, because we hear all this negative stuff about tracking and how we're not going to be able to track anymore. And I think there's like a ton of technology that's up and coming. Ron, you're doing some of it, and we're doing some of it, and we're going to do more that's going to counter some of the things that you're hearing in the news. And I think that's really super important to keep in mind. It's this cookieless future thing that everybody's talking about. Sure, cookies are affected, and it's going to affect some of the ways that you're doing tracking, but there's new or even old ways like MMMs that we're going to talk about that are going to counter some of these problems.
Yeah, I would say there's just a lot of fear mongering these days around cookies and what the death of cookies, quote unquote, the death of cookies means for measurement. I actually think it's one of the best things that's happened in a long time. I wish that third-party cookies were gone like yesterday, as opposed to being delayed to who the hell knows when they're actually going to get rid of them, Google. I think third-party cookies were like the worst way to think about measuring your marketing because a lot of channels have nothing to do with cookies to begin with. If you're running linear TV ads, there's no cookies there. If you're running radio or podcast, there's no cookies there. If you're sending direct mail to someone, there's no cookie there. All these, though, well, not all, but a lot of them have a really great way to be measured using first-party data. A lot of the data that Elevar is collecting, a lot of the data that you want to get, and is actually really smart from a marketing perspective, trying to capture email addresses and phone numbers. Those are also lower-cost ways to get in front of customers. So I think a lot of the best tactics and habits today in terms of getting first-party data actually enables you to do a lot better measurement than you ever were able to do if you were just reliant on third-party cookies. So I think it's a big win for all of us.
I want to transition to a little bit of organic stuff, right? HexClad does an amazing job at working with influencers. I feel like I can't scroll through TikTok without seeing some type of content with a HexClad pan or pot, whatever it is, right? How many people in here are leveraging influencers to drive traffic to their brand? So I think Cam, if you want to kind of talk about how, bringing on influencers into, the brand and using it as a channel, how are you guys attributing, back to influencers, and how are you, understanding, okay, well, if we're driving a ton of traffic from this source of people, how do we actually come up with an ideal budget for your other paid channels? Because I feel like everything kind of works hand in hand. So how do you find that balance?
I think as far as the budget question goes, it's definitely up to like how successful has influencer been for you so far. For us, it was very much of a reverse course of, when we went internal from the agency side, at HexClad, we kind of looked at the bill of all of the influencer spend we had done, and we're like, this is insane. This would be so much better spent just as ad spend on Facebook. And like, we don't even own this content. Like, why is this happening? So we cut everyone essentially at that moment and said, we're just going to switch this to product seeding. We have a very recognizable product. I would much rather have it in as many people's hands at no cost to them and no cost to us except for COGS and shipping. And if they put it on there, if they like it, they'll use it. And if they use it, it'll be in their content. And if it's in their content, we'll find out about it somehow. We definitely were shooting first and asking questions later there, but decided on something like 1% of our monthly content budget would become this COGS and shipping budget that we're just going to start seeding. Since then, it's scaled up fantastically, and we send them out to tons and tons of people. Pretty much any time that there's a cooking influencer, we want to have it out there, because one, we really want those tastemakers to try it, and we really want them to have a positive feeling about us when they do so. And if it ends up in their content, somebody's going to comment on it. We're going to be able to find it either through social listening. Archive AI is what we use to pull the tagging, but also just the mentions, so that we can kind of memorialize those. And from there, we were able to get enough data to say, all right, let's back into a CPM here. And then that's where that budget got set. But it took a long time for us to have a meaningful budget there that was something that was actually a target. I'd say other than that, like now when we're going out and sourcing deals, we do pretty much exclusively, unless you're Gordon Ramsay or Nancy Silverton, you're not getting a cash out influencer deal with us. We're going to move you almost instantly to affiliate. And that's how all of that tracking is going to run through. We're okay with people kind of gamifying affiliate. It saves me time and money on, playing the Google game, and running through all of that. So that's just been the natural move. And I think if influencer, that is not necessarily the be all end all strategy. I think there's a lot of people in this room that have, either a lower price product or a much more fan driven environment where, if somebody were to go and sell Obvi, and they were a model or an influencer of some sort, I could see that generating cash instantaneously. For us, even Hailey Bieber, barely sold a whole lot of pans. And from there, we were like, how do we not spend money on this? And for us, the affiliate route was the answer.
One of my, I guess, not issues, but one of the things that we noticed when we started to really pick up on influencers, you have these moments where you go viral, right? And for a small brand, mid-sized brand, like that can really change the trajectory of the business, right? One thing that I faced was in that moment of, okay, we're seeing like a ton of sales come in just because of this one viral moment, and I'm still spending on Meta. Am I almost like double spending here? If I pulled back on Meta, would I have still made the same amount of sales? Am I kind of cutting into profit here? How do you think about that? And in the sense of like just setting that ideal budget or moving it up or down according to like everything that's happening outside of the ad account?
That's a super interesting question. I don't think we look at it as much on the influencer side like that. But I think the same answer probably applies. And going back to like our sales cycle, so we got 30 to 90 days, generally 60 to 90 days between, you seeing your first ad on Facebook, on YouTube, on TV, and then you purchasing. We have a viral moment for some reason. For us, viral moments are a little harder because you can only be so viral and convince somebody to spend $600 on pans. It's a lot easier to go viral and, sell something sub 100.
Collagen protein.
Yeah, that's probably the right space for virality. But for us, it's just noise. And if I stop spending today on my top of funnel, I'm shrinking my sponge 60 days in the future. So I try to cut that noise out. But when you talk about budgeting, I mean, that's essentially like your baseline versus incrementality argument. So if I'm allowing that moment of incrementality to, make me change what I'm trying to feed to my baseline budget, like I'm listening too much to the noise and trying to be too profit driven at every second. When sometimes you just, you got to keep the engine running. And if you start going downhill, you can let off the gas a little bit, but ideally you're going to keep pushing straight through it so that you don't end up in a lull 30, 60, 90 days down the future.
Have any of you guys had issues where you advertise, it looks like it's not working, then you double back and you realize that it was working and you can prove it? Have you run into those situations?
We've seen that with a lot of our clients.
Yeah.
It tends to happen more for channels that are hard to track and hard to measure. Classic example would be somebody investing in like direct mail. They start sending the mail, they don't really see an impact, mostly because they're logging into Google Analytics and you won't see direct mail show up there. It's just not going to appear there. Their direct mail vendor is going to potentially say, yeah, we're performing really well, but everyone's skeptical of their vendors that are actually running the media. So that's a huge kind of thing to look out for. Just generally, any channel where there could be gaps in data, that could be like view through on TikTok or Pinterest or Snapchat, very visual channels. You could be having a lot of success there. It's just not showing up in Google Analytics. To me, the thing I always say is like, it's fine to run a test and for that test to fail. The thing that's the worst thing to do is run a test and not know if it failed, because then you just burnt money. So yeah, I would just be really cautious around making sure, like, at least when you're running something, you know how you're going to gauge, did it work or did not work, so you can make decisions afterwards.
For us, that was YouTube.
Yeah, that's another one all the time.
Yeah. And I was our Google buyer on the agency side, so I was buying the Google and the YouTube ads, and was just sitting there watching the lack of conversion data come through, and I was like, we're so screwed. I'm never going to get budget to invest in this channel again. And at that time, on the agency side, I didn't have access to the post-purchase survey, so I wasn't looking at those things. Didn't know whether or not there was some semblance of noise coming through that said YouTube might be working. So I killed it. Gave the defeated speech on the weekly call and was like, yeah, we spent 10 G's on YouTube and I didn't get anything out of it. Everybody was bummed because the creative was awesome, and there's no click-through data, there's no conversion data. I just couldn't validate it, and then we got access to the post-purchase survey and saw that it went from 0% to like 5% of our responses. I was like, oh no! Not only did it work, it worked really well. And we turned it back on.
Give you credit there. I've heard a lot of folks when that happens, they try to justify it and say YouTube is just a branding channel. So they look at the CPM of YouTube and they compare it to CPMs they can get on other channels, and they go, hey, we found this amazing place to build our brand.
Yeah.
So it's like when the performance isn't there, it was actually branding from the get-go.
Yeah.
Kind of changing history after the fact.
Cam, one thing that you said there was, because you guys do have a buying cycle of 60 and 90 days, right? How do you think about like that, how long you're actually running a test for? If you're like, oh, after a week, I'm not seeing too much or whatever it is that enough time to really determine something?
So we've been doing it for long enough that we have generally like benchmarks of like what it should look like in a week. And we never compare a test to anything other than a control metric. So like that control metric is going to be an aggregated view of all of our tests of that same asset type in that same infant stage. So if it's, control statics testing stage was like 2 weeks, and then you can look at that against something else that's been tested for 2 weeks, and then might have moved into scale and become more successful in that scale campaign. But you're only comparing it to that early 2 weeks across the board. For us, a week is generally not enough. And then as we dive into incrementality testing, that one's a really unique beast, because incrementality testing is exclusively just, coming off of the mean. So if you don't give somebody 30 days to be incremental, you're basically asking an impossible question of, make my Facebook spend look like it's working really well right now, but we've only been spending for 7 days in theory.
Are there any channels you choose not to invest in because it's tough to measure, or has that not happened yet?
Last year we moved pretty heavily off of linear TV, simply because it's harder to measure than CTV. And I figured, if they're mostly equal, we can keep a small strategic fund for buying, really like fire sale type stuff on NFL, NBA, MLB, just some of those easy splashes that are great social proof. They're, great little moments. It definitely gets the team excited, and you're getting them for 50, 60, 70% off. And you're going in and measuring hour over hour traffic and conversions versus like your last couple weeks average, and trying to measure it that way. But I couldn't keep Evergreen going with linear as easily, just because I couldn't stand the reporting.
Ron, curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, we've definitely had situations where clients want to invest in the channel. They kind of come to Rockerbox and ask, like, how do you measure it? Do you have access to data to measure that? Do you have a methodology? If the answer is no across the board, we've seen times where the client just won't actually end up investing into the channel. That happened with Roku back in the day before we had integration there. That's happened a little bit actually even with like some of the social channels, more TikTok, Snapchat, Pinterest. They until we were able to measure views there, a lot of clients, they dipped their toe. It didn't really work. They pulled out, and then a month or 2 or 3 later, they're like, well, I think I should give it another shot, but I need something to have changed measurement-wise to potentially give me a reason for making that investment. Linear TV comes up a lot. We have methodologies for that. We ingest post-log files, and we look for increase in site visits and against a baseline. But for most folks, like if you're just using Google Analytics, which is, I think, the place everyone should be starting, yeah, I mean, if you're going to be spending it to a channel and you're going to see nothing show up in your GA report, that's scary. You're being held to account for those dollars. So yeah.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, just quickly, linear TV is we approach a ton of different partners to do tracking, and linear TV is one of the places that like you try and we can't work with these people. It's really difficult to work with them to get them our data. And I think because of that, and I know you guys have done some stuff.
We should talk more.
We should talk more. I know you guys have done a lot. You dove deeper into it, but I think there's like a lot of meat on the bone in that world.
Yeah, linear TV is just a beast to measure. Like there are two main ways that you can do it. One is you get these post-log reports. They're CSVs saying where and when an ad was served. So like at 12:30 in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, I served an ad on Planet Earth. Like that would be in the report. And then you have to go analyze what happened at 12:30 in Tuscaloosa, Alabama compared to the baseline. That's one approach. It's really, really cumbersome because if you're running across tons of networks across the country, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of post log reports that you have to ingest and normalize and standardize. The other way some people go about measuring linear TV is actually procuring ACR data sets. I forget what ACR actually stands for, but it's sold by like Vizio and Roku. They have these data sets that basically say what people are watching while they're on their TV. So that could be like user level IP-based data. Problem there is you're only getting like maybe, well, whatever percentage of the market Vizio is, that's the amount of data you can get. So maybe that's 20% or 25%, and then you have to extrapolate up. So it's a combination of deterministic data with some modeling, which is, it's not a bad technique, but this all comes back to every way to measure marketing is flawed. I think it's just really important to know like what are the gaps of the measurement methodology you're using against the channel you're using, against the strategy you're using for branding versus bottom funnel. But yeah, linear TV is definitely one of the harder ones.
I want to talk about some of the own channels for brands. So we talked about community, right? Whether you have like a Facebook group or, you know, a Slack channel or whatever it is, I feel like these channels are specifically like our Facebook group, right? We have like almost 90,000 people in there. It's not a sales channel, right? It's a support group for customers, right? In the hopes that if somebody does have a question, we can answer it in this community versus them kind of just giving up on the product and moving on. How do you guys think about, you know, channels like this where it's not really meant for sales, but it can be very helpful for maybe pushing somebody over the edge to buying something? How do you guys think about that?
I mean, those are really important, like, brand experience channels. For us, I think our community is probably, I mean, I based it entirely off of yours. Thanks for that, by the way.
Absolute honor.
Yeah, it made the beginning of last year a lot easier when Jason said, "Cam, go figure out community." And I was like, okay, well, you know, what does this look like? What does it look like when it's actually generating sales? Which was really my original goal, was find another sales channel that's a little more organic. What came to be was, you know, we just kind of crawled into a fan created community, started reaching out really consistently to their leader. Her name's Bobby, and Bobby is an older lady that absolutely loves HexClad and owns every single thing that we've ever made. And she evangelizes that across the web. And we decided, you know, if you'll let us, we'd love to come in here and help you moderate, and we'd love to come in and provide some value. We can do gifts, we can do flash deals. And she was super excited about it. Let us on in. We tossed a moderator in there from our side. His name's Marshall, but its name is HexClad Ashley. It's a big discussion internally of whether or not we should actually change it to Marshall's photo, but it's up to him. I was going to say, and you know, it's not a requirement of the job for you to be in here, so totally up to you. But we use that channel really to kind of do what you said, provide those stories, provide more, we call it white glove customer service, but putting, you know, yourself just in front of these customers and being a little bit more raw than you would be in a customer service way or in a marketing way, and then just providing value and having fun, you know, letting them do whatever they want and not really being super brand controlled. But it gives you a very, very different, you know, level of feedback when they're your super fans, and they're defending, you know, us from people, and also are giving us difficult feedback at times, saying like, I really didn't like that, and we're like, well, if you're telling me that, I can't imagine anyone else liked it, so we should really do something about it. It's just made a really great dialogue with a lot of our customers.
I want to move into more of the technical side of things. So who here is using some attribution tool, whether it be like a Triple Whale or Rockerbox or North Beam? And then how many people are maybe just using like GA or like their Shopify dashboard? So I want to bring up something here where it's, you have one side of things where it's like, yeah, you can set up maybe a UTM link or something to start tracking traffic from specific sources, right? For those who may be just doing that, what are some of the opportunities that they're missing out on by just doing that?
I mean, I think the key there is just be really, really diligent to start. Like we could talk about the opportunities you're missing out, but I think a lot of people are not even really hitting the nail properly there. Simple things like if you're calling something branding in YouTube and you're calling it upper funnel in Facebook and you're calling it prospecting in TikTok, that's going to make all of your data kind of messed up. There are ways you can fix that and try to normalize it, but just being really, really clean and diligent with your UTMs as is kind of table stakes. But again, like there are a lot of channels where UTMs and the even concept of clicking has no relevance. You're not clicking on an ad on Sirius XM while you're driving your car, you know? So you need like the table stakes of really strong, properly set up UTMs, but it can only go so far. And that's also where like, what's the next easiest thing to do? Post-purchase surveys, kind of a no-brainer as well. So yeah, just clean data.
John, any thoughts?
Yeah, what do you guys see in terms of, easily measurable stuff? Like, let's say Facebook's easy to measure. It's not really, but let's say that it is. Above and beyond those kinds of channels, like when you're using sophisticated measurement tools, what is going unmeasured? Like what kind of, I don't know, percentage or is there a magnitude that often goes unmeasured?
So to the first part, Meta is both the simplest and the hardest channel to measure, I'd say, just given the scale of it and the delta between clicks and views. I mean, we can talk a lot around like what is the impact of a view on Meta. I'll also step back and say like the cool part about being a measurement provider is I don't really care. I don't care if Meta works or doesn't work. I don't care if Roku works or doesn't work. I don't get paid on that. So I have the unique position to just try to be at least get the most accurate data as I possibly can. We're not perfect by any means, but it's a cool starting vantage point. I'd say the biggest gaps end up being really once you start thinking around really views, particularly again for like a TikTok. TikTok is a highly visual channel. People are going through it very, very quickly. They're seeing ads at a high frequency. How often are they actually clicking through and going on the in-app browser in TikTok to convert? Not that frequently. We see the data. It doesn't happen that often. We've been able to work with partners like that to get access to data to know who actually viewed an ad. And we can see, did they actually convert afterwards? So that can be huge changes. I think it was a 6x increase in the number of conversions attributed to TikTok when you include view-through data versus not. Now, I'll say this though too. Just because there's a 6x increase in conversions attributed to TikTok, it doesn't mean that all of those conversions should be fully credited to TikTok. It doesn't mean that they may not have happened otherwise. But at least you need to, I think it's helpful to have the right underlying data so you can then start to do analysis on top of that. But it really just comes back to this. If you think about GA, any channel that you're running media on that's not going into GA is something you need to ask. How are you measuring it? How big of a gap is that data? How big is that data gap? And what's the impact on that data gap? It can take a channel that has a sub 1x ROAS and make it actually above 1. Now, again, above 1 is not necessarily enough to invest in, but at least it goes from every dollar and I'm losing to every dollar I'm maybe making something. So it could really swing a channel from completely throw it out to investable.
I think we're kind of starting to beat around this incrementality bush too, which I think is
Let's do it.
Is definitely priming. But one other thing that I'd say that I think you were kind of building out is that like attribution doesn't happen in a vacuum. And just because like, let's say, Super Tool has absolutely everything and it'll pull in views data, it still doesn't tell you what happened.
Right.
And it doesn't tell you, hey, my mom saw this ad, but we had talked about wanting something like that. And then my dad had seen a different one on TikTok. And when she brought it up, he gave her another value prop that she hadn't seen in the ad that she saw. And then she bought. Okay, who gets the credit there? And all of those things, no matter how well measured, are not really going to tell you what happened in that customer journey. And that's what actually matters. So
it's fundamentally impossible. You're completely right. Yeah. And like any measurement provider who pretends that their measurement is perfect is lying to you. Most don't say that though, so I give everyone credit for that. But it is an unsolvable problem. There are like all these versions of the line. It's about trying to minimize imperfection, or it's about trying to give direction. But it's actually true. I think fundamentally, like I always think about it, like if you're dropped in a desert and you do a 360 and you see nothing anywhere, that's like really, really horrible. But if you at least kind of see a sign somewhere and that's the direction to go into, the odds are much higher that you actually get to that oasis or whatever. You find where you're trying to, the destination. And I think that's a lot of measurement, right? It's not perfect. It can't capture everything. But it's supposed to give some direction. I'd also say it matters what the question is, right? Like not every, if you're trying to do budgeting versus trying to understand, is this channel I'm investing me in getting me in front of new versus repeat customers, like different ways of measurement are better suited to answer those different questions. Neither one's going to do it perfectly, but still it's knowing, is it media mix modeling, or is it surveys, or is it running a geo holdout test, or is it MTA? Is it just benchmarks? Like, hey, I invested into TikTok. Am I overpaying? They're like, you just need the right tool for the right question.
So talking about tools, right? At what point do these tools become necessary for brands? And do you think there's a point where too many tools become overkill? I know, Cam, you have a lot of things going on at HexClad, so I'm curious your thoughts there.
I was definitely reinformed last night that my kaleidoscope method just sounds expensive, and you're right, it is. It's very cool, it's very fun. If it makes sense for your organization to feel like trying to wrestle this question is worth it, then it's worth it. But honestly, I don't think you need anything other than Google Analytics to go very, very far. You're going to need to do a lot more work. You're going to have to be much more diligent about naming conventions and making everything actually correct. And in those naming conventions, actually going into the campaigns and saying, if this says non-brand, is it actually? Because 80% of the time it's not. So yeah, just because you name it that doesn't unfortunately make it that. I would say there becomes a point where when your media buying gets very technical, and your goal for optimization and scale is time bound. You don't have the time to learn to make Google Analytics work. And in those moments, you can choose to use a measurement solution. But honestly, I've seen some amazing brands running exclusively on the back of Google Analytics and Display Studio 360 dashboards that they've made for free, and they're doing amazing things, and they understand exactly how things are working within that last non-direct click, and they accept that one bias instead of accepting 10 from all the tools that I use. I just like clicking around stuff.
I think you're completely right. If you're just on Meta, you don't need any tool. Like, you don't need to pay for a third-party measurement provider. There's an argument, like, if you're just on Meta, but you're spending $1 billion a year on Meta, then, do you need a third party? No, but, it's just probably ROI. It's worth it to have something else you can cross-check. None of us are spending $1 billion on Meta. I purposely went to the extreme. But the point is, I think if you're on one main channel, you don't need a third party. If two of your channels are making up more than 80% of your ad spend, odds are even still you don't really need anything else. You can still have your finger on the pulse enough to know, if I spend 10% on Google, what's going to happen? I think it's really just the more channels that you're live on, the more omni-channel you are in terms of your distribution, and at a certain level of spend is when it actually starts to just make sense to invest in a third-party measurement solution. But you're completely right. I've seen brands that have killed it on Google and Meta, spending 20, 30 million a year, and they use GA, and they can be very successful doing that.
How do you guys think about the future of, attribution? Do you guys think it will, or we can all be hopeful, right, and think it's going to get easier, but do you see any challenges in the future?
Yes. No, I mean, for real, I think measurement's only going to get harder. I think, go back a decade ago, a lot of brands could be purely successful on Facebook and Google, and everything was easy. All the privacy things were simple. So we've just evolved a long way since there. I think that if you look out, we're actually in a pretty good position with the measurement world these days. There are more companies than ever. There are more technology providers than ever that are actually having really good solutions in market, Rockerbox being one of them. There's a resurgence of measurement methodologies, some that were old that are coming back in vogue, like media mix modeling, some that are starting to become just more common and more easy to implement, geo testing, scale testing. So yeah, I think there are both tailwinds and headwinds. I think reliance on first-party data is actually what everyone should be focusing on a lot. regardless of what type of measurement you're doing, knowing your customers as much as possible is just a winning proposition. So yeah, it's going to get harder and harder, but I think similarly, the technology, the providers, and the solutions have been getting better over the last 5 years also. So it's, everything's getting harder, but the solutions out there are also getting better.
I won't talk about all the details. We've talked about it a couple times, but be able to measure better than your competitor. If you can do that, if you have a competitor on TikTok and they understand how to measure it and you don't, and they're running free reign on that platform, that's probably not a great thing.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I think measurement and execution are like, they're separate too. Like, just because you can measure something doesn't necessarily make you better at it. And you've got to use all of the tools in your belt to, like, ideally then go and make another great decision based on a measured outcome.
Yeah, that's like the best point made all day, honestly. I've seen enough of my customers that sign up with the Rockerbox, start using it. They even get in, some of them actually struggle to figure out the question they want to answer. Some of the ones who do get the answer, but then they're like, what do I do with that? And do they actually execute on it? If you don't have the diligence internally to go from data to question to answer to decision to execution, it's not worth honestly paying for a measurement provider. There are some cool things happening now, though, where you're starting to be able to feed results of measurement back into ad buying platforms automatically. It's some of the CAPI work that's coming out. A bunch of buying platforms are willing to take in third-party measurement as an automatic feed to optimize against. So I think that's, like, if I look forward-looking, I think that's the biggest opportunity, because it kind of removes the onus of doing the work from the marketer and just closes the loop in terms of feeding back results directly into the buying platform. That's a really exciting proposition. I think is going to make this a lot easier, but there's still ways to go until we get there.
We do some questions, Ash, before we run out of time.
Yeah, I was just about to say we have a few minutes for some questions. So if anybody has anything, over here, Mike.
Just cut.
I think Mike's coming.
One sec.
Yeah, gotcha. So for people that don't have the scale that you have, how do you, someone like me, see through the noise of false positives, such as right time, right place, that kind of stuff? Is there something that we can do since we don't have the mass data that you have access to?
I mean, seeing through the noise there, I mean, I guess it depends on what you mean by not having mass data. I always use historical data, just going backwards. At some point, if there's truly no data, let's say you've been, running for a month and then there's just a big spike in the middle of it, you can scratch and claw to try and figure out what that was. But I think maybe to kind of my answer to his question earlier on that virality component, just stay the course. Like, if you've got a short term of data and you can't read through like why something happened, I think that most of the time all you can do is just keep going, and keep creating a budget that makes sense for your business, that's going to be profitable enough, or not profitable enough but not sink you, and continue flying that course, because until you have that data you can't answer that question. I hope that was helpful.
That's good.
Any other questions, guys?
Over that corner over there.
So one of the kind of hot topics out there where I'll hear different answers from a lot of different experts, so I'd just like kind of your opinion on the topic, is specifically on Meta, kind of the halo effect with other channels and with email and with organic search, etc. Right? I found it personally hard to measure that for brands I've worked with. So what is your opinion on specifically like Meta's impact on the rest of the channels, specifically, at HexClad or any other brands you've worked on in the past?
Holdout testing. Like, really, we just onboarded with House a couple months ago, and shout out to them, because it's a fantastic product. It's very self-serve, but the only answer you're going to get from that is from holdout testing. If you're able to hold out Meta, hold out those other channels, and kind of see where that halo moves, it's incredible. And we learned things that we weren't expecting to, like what Meta's halo to Amazon sales especially is. And previously, we didn't measure Amazon sales with our, D2C MER. So, I mean, it was a big awakening of how much that channel impacts. But those halos are they're kind of flashes in the pan, like the measurement that you're getting from Facebook is enough to make the decision. But understanding that halo is kind of like that expensive want to know answer.
I'll give a cheaper version of it. You can run these tests in the platforms themselves for free.
Right.
Yours is more complicated because you're trying to do the Amazon version of it. So completely acknowledge. Third parties are very helpful for that. But you can run holdout tests in almost every platform at no cost. So it's worth giving it a shot.
And I think don't channel lift studies. You can't Elevar has I think today, believe it or not, I don't know why we're doing a launch today, but we are. And we have a feature for Meta where we're sending. It's called the channel lift study. You can look into it, but it's trying to solve that exact problem, and it's sort of push button in the app. So that might be a place to look too. We should probably get off the stage.
No, thank you guys. Everybody, a round of applause for these guys. Thank you.